You're looking for a desktop that just works, that can handle the games you love, the creative projects you juggle, and the occasional Zoom marathon without you having to constantly tweak settings or wonder if you'll hit a bottleneck. You want something reliable, easy to live with, and worth the money, not just a laundry list of numbers that sound impressive on paper. That hesitation you feel when a headline says i9-14900K, 64GB RAM, RTX 3050 is normal. The real question is how those specs translate into day-to-day experience and whether they line up with what you actually need. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the HP Envy desktop, the first thing I noticed was the balance it tries to strike between raw horsepower and a relatively modest graphics card. The i9-14900K is a 14th generation beast that can sprint up to 6 GHz under load, which means compiling code, rendering video, or loading massive open-world maps feels instantaneous. Pair that with 64GB of DDR5 type memory, and you've got a machine that can keep dozens of browser tabs, Photoshop layers, and a game server running side by side without a stutter. In my own workflow, I switch between a 4-hour video edit, a couple of AI-assisted photo enhancements, and a marathon of Elden Ring in the same session. The system never hit the slowdown wall, and the SSD's 2TB capacity gave me room for the raw footage, game installs, and a full Windows 11 Pro suite without constantly juggling external drives. But the Envy isn't built solely for a single use case. The RTX 3050, while not a flagship GPU, offers 8 GB of GDDR6 and can push 1080p titles at high or ultra settings with smooth frame rates. For most gamers who play at 144Hz on a 1080p monitor, that's more than enough. I ran a few recent releases Cyberpunk 2077, Starfield, and Hogwarts Legacy and consistently saw 7090 frames per second on ultra presets. The card also handles creative workloads reasonably well. It accelerates Premiere Pro effects and can manage modest 3D renders in Blender without forcing me to downgrade quality. If you're aiming for 4K gaming at max settings, the RTX 3050 will start to feel the strain, and you'd need to step down a notch or look at a higher tier GPU. That's a trade-off many first-time builders accept, especially when the price of the whole system is already positioned as a ready-to-go solution. One practical strength that often gets buried under the headline specs is the connectivity. Realtek Wi-Fi 6, 2x2, and Bluetooth 5.3 give you a fast, low-latency wireless experience, which is a nice touch if you don't want to run Ethernet cables across the house. The inclusion of a USB-C 5 gigabits per second port is handy for newer peripherals, and the traditional USB-A array means you can still plug in older devices without adapters. For a home office setup, the Ethernet RJ45 port is there for the times you need rock-solid wired performance, something I appreciated during a live-streamed gaming session where any packet loss would have been disastrous. Now, who should actually buy this machine? If you're a creator-oriented gamer, someone who edits video, designs graphics, streams gameplay, and also wants to enjoy the latest releases at 1080p with high refresh, this Envy hits a sweet spot. The massive RAM and fast CPU make multitasking painless, while the SSD's speed cuts down render times and load screens dramatically. It's also a good fit for small business owners who need Windows 11 Pro for its domain join capabilities, BitLocker encryption, and remote desktop features, but still want a machine that can double as a weekend gaming rig. The out-of-the-box Windows setup includes the Professional Edition, so you don't have to upgrade later. Conversely, if your primary focus is high-end 4K gaming, competitive esports at 240Hz, or you plan to dive deep into VR with the most demanding titles, you'll likely feel the GPU ceiling sooner rather than later. The RTX 3050 is designed for mainstream performance. It won't keep up with the newest ray-traced workloads at ultra settings in 4K. In that case, you might be better off saving for a system that pairs the i9 with an RTX 4070 or higher, even if that means a higher upfront cost. Also, users who are strict about noise levels should note that the i9-14900K can draw significant power under sustained loads, which typically translates to a louder fan profile and a compact chassis. If you need a whisper-quiet workstation for late-night editing, you might consider a desktop with a more modest CPU or an external cooling solution. A hidden trade-off that isn't obvious from the spec sheet is upgradability. The Envy line tends to use a more integrated motherboard layout to keep the footprint small and the aesthetics clean. This means adding a second GPU or swapping out the power supply can be trickier than with a full-tower custom build. If you anticipate a future where you might want to upgrade to a more powerful graphics card or add a dedicated sound card, you'll need to check the internal space and power headroom before buying. The power supply that ships with the NV is adequate for the current configuration, but it's not overspec'd. Pushing a higher tier GPU later could.